This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Gunfire heard at Mali Army base as soldiers mutiny outside capital. Mauritius arrests captain of Japanese oil spill ship. And UN-backed tribunal finds Hezbollah suspect guilty of Hariri murder. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. And standing by for the latest in business is Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. The Democratic Republic of Congo reopens her airspace to international traffic after nearly 5 months of shutdown. And headline inflation has risen for the 11th month in a row to just under 13% in Nigeria. We'll have the details on those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Hannah.
Thanks, Robin. We'll see you in a bit. Well, let's start in Mali, where sounds of gunfire had been heard near an army base in the capital, Bamako. This comes amid fears of a possible military mutiny. Local residents say the incident took place at an army base called Kati, where a similar incident in 2012 led to a coup. It is not yet known what is behind the current situation. Unconfirmed reports say that gunfire was also heard near the Prime Minister's office. A senior military official has confirmed the incident, but said he did not have details of what had transpired. Meanwhile, the West African Economic Bloc, ECOWAS, has urged soldiers to stop the mutiny. The French embassy in Mali has also urged its citizens to remain indoors. Mali has been facing a political crisis with opponents of President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta leading mass protests, calling on him to resign. They blame him for failing to tame insecurity and address corruption. Leaders from the region have stepped in to try to resolve the crisis. Well, CGTN's Deji Badmos now joins us for the latest on the current situation in Mali. Deji, thank you so much for joining us. What is the latest in Mali, Deji?
Well, Hannah, it's a very fluid situation in Bamako as we speak, and there's total confusion, as you have been reporting, of course. This problem actually started, the mutiny actually started at that military barracks now at Kati, just 15 kilometers from Bamako, the capital of Mali, of course. And we understand quite a number of senior officers and government officials have actually been detained by the soldiers now, and that the situation is quite very fluid. So total confusion. Some senior government officials have been detained. And of course, you did talk about the shooting near the Prime Minister's office, but there's no information at all as to the whereabouts of the Prime Minister, if the soldiers have actually detained him as well.
And this is what I was going to ask you, Deji, about if you'd heard about the whereabouts of where President Keïta is at the moment. What are you hearing regarding that, and just around the concern of what that might mean just in terms of political stability or the little bit that is there in the country at the moment?
Well, what we're hearing is that President Keïta has been moved to a safe place. There's no doubt at all that those who are in charge of his security would have learned from what happened in 2012 when another mutiny similar to this actually started there and led to the coup d'etat that toppled the president back then, Amadou Toumani Touré. So we understand the president has been moved to a safe place, but the government itself has not issued any statement. The president has not spoken. It's a very fluid situation, as I said, and everyone is watching very, very closely. It's something not too good, and we understand that opponents of President Keïta have actually taken to the Independence Square in the capital, that's in Bamako now, and that they are fully in support of the military action. But as we speak, Hannah, we still do not know who is actually coordinating these soldiers who are taking this action.
Deji, what we do know is that ECOWAS has been working at mediating a solution in Mali. Has ECOWAS reacted to this latest incident, Deji? And also, following with that, looking at the current developments, can it be said that the regional body has failed in its efforts to mediate a solution in Mali?
Well, so far we can say the regional body has failed because up till this very moment it's not been able to convince the opposition to accept its demand. The president, as a matter of fact, has made concessions, but the opposition has refused to accept it. Earlier today, the former president of Nigeria, Goodluck Jonathan, who is ECOWAS Special Envoy to Mali, actually met with President Buhari to brief him about the situation there, and he made it quite clear that the movement, that's the June 5 movement now, the opposition movement now, have basically, essentially refused to accept the conditions now spelled out by ECOWAS, basically demanding that the president has to resign. But of course, ECOWAS too has also issued a very strong worded statement, I must say. Earlier, just a few hours ago, the body actually issued a statement asking the soldiers to return to the barracks, and also, going to the extent of saying, look, it was ready to take every necessary action to ensure that democracy is maintained and that order is returned to that country. So, with that kind of statement, you just cannot rule out the possibility of some kind of intervention. Military, we do not know for now, but ECOWAS has said it is ready to take every action necessary to ensure that democracy is maintained in that country. And of course, as you know, ECOWAS' position is that the president should not be asked to step down, that whatever has to be done through the democratic process. If there's going to be a change of a guard now at the level of the presidency, it has to be through the democratic process. But of course, the opposition movement is having none of that. They just want the president to resign and leave. So it's a standoff, and everyone is waiting to see how ECOWAS is going to handle this very, very fluid situation. Hannah?
Thank you so much, Deji. Deji Badmus joining us there and speaking to us about that latest incident in Mali. Well, we now head over to Mauritius, where authorities have arrested the captain of a Japanese bulk carrier that ran aground off its coast. The ship caused a devastating oil spill in one of the world's most pristine maritime environments. According to local police, another member of the ship's crew was also arrested alongside the captain. Both have been denied bail and are still in custody. Meanwhile, bad weather has hampered the towing of the piece that split off the ship. Foreign experts were scheduled to tow it to the Alang shipyard in the Indian state of Gujarat. The MV Wakishio struck a coral reef and ran aground. It later started spilling oil into the sea. According to a spokesperson, the Mauritian Coast Guard had tried to warn the ship's captain against taking the route, but did not receive any response. Where earlier on, CGTN's Liu Fufei spoke with the Vice Prime Minister of Mauritius on the latest efforts to stem the spread of the oil spill into the country's fragile marine ecosystem.
I mean, the other things that we have been working on, we have been discussing today, is about how to manage the shore now, the beaches, the shore, because we know we have quite a bit of oil on the shore. How to clean it, because again, today we had a meeting by the different experts. How do we set up to clean the shore now? So a committee was set up, a plan was kind of has been prepared. It was kind of introduced. It was presented to the Prime Minister, and the plan has been, the framework as a plan has been agreed by the National Committee this afternoon. So from tomorrow, I think this team who are trying to work on the beaches, to clean the beaches, would start organizing themselves and get to work to start cleaning the beaches. That's number one. And secondly, we have been checking the air quality in the surrounding villages, at the school, to make sure that air quality is all right. It's not going to affect the health of anybody. That's number one. Secondly, we have been examining the water in the lagoon to make sure, I mean, there's not much hydrocarbon. It's not affecting the fauna and flora of the lagoon.
And what are the preliminary findings? I was out there. The stench for a while was overwhelming.
It is. I mean, it is. But actually, I mean, we have not got the report. I'm not got the report now. We should be getting some report later this evening. But it is, from the reports that we had before, it's not very high. The volatile substance is not that high.
How long do you anticipate the cleanup to take?
That's difficult to say now, because that would depend how we go. I mean, even the experts themselves tell us, look, we are not going to have any, we are not going to give us any date, because it would depend how the cleaning is going to go. It is going to take months. You know what I mean? So, but we can't say how many months. I can't say now.
Well, months is good news.
Well, let's hope so, because, but I mean, as I tell you, even that is not definite. It may take more than that. It depends how much cleaning we are going to do, because again, there's different level of cleaning you have to do. So it depends on many factors. So it's difficult to give a definite end point now.
Mozambique's President Filipe Nyusi, as the new chairperson of the Southern African Development Community SADC, he took over leadership of the regional bloc during the 40th Heads of State and Government Summit. During the virtual meeting, President Nyusi committed to honoring the theme of its tenure, which is building peace as well as promoting development and resilience in the face of global challenges. Elisa Njamela reports.
Keeping with the new normal, the annual SADC meeting was held online. A number of leaders from the Southern African Development Community attended this meeting. It was soon clear that the region has many issues to grapple with. These include the ongoing attacks in Mozambique, allegedly by a terrorist group. These leaders committed to the government of Mozambique to help combat the attacks.
This reminds us of the importance to continue to cooperate, and personally I trust if we cooperate and work together and work closely, our community has the capacity to face all these challenges and contain them, as we have been able to do so in the past years, including slavery, colonialism, and apartheid.
The COVID-19 pandemic was also top of the agenda. Lesotho is one of the countries that are concerned about the porous borders in the region, which they say are linked to the spread of the virus.
The porosity of our borders with the Republic of South Africa permits unmonitored human traffic between the two countries, which in turn amplifies the risk of both importation and exportation of the virus. This also makes contact tracing very difficult, and contact tracing is at the heart of our infection prevention strategy. We are, however, working hard with our South African counterparts to develop a strategy to address these challenges.
This annual meeting also saw Mozambique take over the chairmanship of SADC, taking over from Tanzania. Accepting his new role, Mozambican President Filipe Nyusi said he would like to see better regional integration in line with the development, peace and stability goals.
We commit ourselves to fulfill the mission of abnegation, and for our success, we count with the support of every and each one of the member states. We will work closely with the heads of state and government and with the Troika.
The meeting did not mention Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe has been rocked by protests amidst reports of human rights violations. The summit also elected Botswana President Mokgweetsi Masisi to chair the organ of politics, defense and security, taking over from his Zimbabwean counterpart, President Emmerson Mnangagwa. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, now for one of our top stories from outside the continent. A UN-backed tribunal has found an alleged Hezbollah member guilty of the 2005 bombing that killed Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri. Salim Ayash was the main defendant in the trial of 4 men charged with conspiracy to kill Hariri. Judges said he used his cell phone, critical in the attack. All 4 defendants were tried in absentia. Hariri's assassination led to the withdrawal of Syrian forces and set the stage for years of confrontation between rival political forces. The case has been overshadowed by the massive blast that took place in Beirut early this month. The judgment concerning Hariri's killing was expected earlier in August, but was delayed by the explosion. Our reporter Stephanie Fried has more on the impact of the verdict.
After that assassination in 2005, this country fell into sectarian divisions. Hezbollah, which is believed to be these 4 operatives behind this assassination, they represent the Shiite faction. That versus the Sunni factions within this country. There are other different groups, and that sectarian, those divisions are so strong in Lebanon They play out in government, they play out within society, and the concern is that going down the pike, in the past, sectarian violence certainly has played a huge role in Lebanon. Going down the pike, depending on this investigation and where it heads around the explosion, not the tribunal, but the explosion that took place 2 weeks ago, analysts predict that possibly the country could fall into another round of sectarian violence.
Well, in news just in, back to our top story in Mali, where it is now emerging that President Boubacar Keïta and his Prime Minister have been arrested. We are following up on the developing situation and will bring you more as and when it happens. Well, let's now take a short break and return. More stories making headlines, including Uganda faces a possible lockdown as coronavirus cases rise. And Nigeria's final year students get ready for exams.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo.
Who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile. Along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Since I'm sitting on this particular table with great people, can each one of you give me one advice that I will mark it by heart and I will remember it for 10 years?
The road of entrepreneurship is going to be tough as you scale your business. But what you shouldn't forget is you take care of your family. Because if your family is happy, then they will support you.
As you build, you take into account the diversity of Africa and the world. This core to your business is skills.
Welcome back. You're watching News Making Headlines right here on Africa Live, and in News Just In, we're back to our top story at the hour, where Mali, it is now emerging that President Boubacar Keïta and his Prime Minister have been arrested. We are following up on that, the developing situation, and we'll bring you more as and when it happens. And that was news that has just come in. Well, let's move on to Uganda now, where authorities there have expressed concern as the country recorded 66 new COVID-19 cases on Sunday. The Africa Centers for Disease Control has reported 1,500 cases as well as 13 deaths so far. Reporting from Uganda, here is Hariri Ayesiga.
A busy day on the streets of the capital Kampala. People here should be social distancing and wearing face masks. But local authorities are getting concerned that the rules aren't being followed, and that is leading to a spike in cases in the capital.
We've noticed that the level of vigilance has deteriorated and is even worse over the weekends, where you see the majority of members of the public not wearing masks, not social distancing, and even entering places without hand washing with water and soap.
Since May, Uganda has been gradually easing lockdown measures. But on Sunday, 66 new infections were recorded, one of the country's highest totals in weeks, prompting worries restrictions have been lifted too soon. This is downtown Kampala, and business is gradually getting back to normal. But as the country continues to register more COVID-19 cases, authorities are moving to enforce strict health measures. Authorities say a second lockdown is now a real possibility.
We may see ourselves reintroducing more stringent lockdown enforcement measures to help curb the spread of this virus.
According to the country's Joint Task Force on Coronavirus, the current hotspots for the virus include shopping arcades, slums and border points. The country's health ministry says they don't have enough testing kits to meet the rising numbers. They are now considering a move to ask all foreigners entering Uganda to pay for their COVID-19 tests.
We are going to charge the travelers from outside. And it is not only at the border here, because even at the airport, if it opens, they will charge, because government will not be able to pay for everyone.
The government is now racing to determine the extent of the spread of the virus among communities in Kampala and is planning on using the military to further enforce precautionary measures. Hilary Isga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
The Nigerian government has reopened schools across the country for final year students. At least 1.5 million learners are registered to take part in this year's exams. But with the tests around the corner, they only have a few days left to prepare. Phil Ihaza reports from Abuja.
Hand washing and the use of face masks have become part of the new norm for final year students of Cherryfield Secondary School in Abuja. After about 6 months of staying at home due to the COVID-19 pandemic, many of them say they are excited to be back in school.
I'm very happy to be back in school, majorly because of my final exam. So my final exam is like majorly the best part of a secondary school life. So you know that you're done and you're moving up to a higher institution.
When we were at home, it was really discouraging because we had no idea if we're still going to write our final exams. So now that we know, it's really nice to know, like it's making me really happy.
However, they had less than 2 weeks to prepare for the exams, and students say it may be a tough task making good grades. Many private schools embarked on online classes during the lockdown, but many students from public schools could not afford to pay for data or the gadgets required to study online.
The 2 weeks is actually really short because at home we had a lot of struggles. It wasn't easy reading at home. We didn't have teachers to consult. Personally, I would have preferred if I started in September.
Last month, the federal government decided to reopen schools across the country in August, so graduating students would not miss a whole school year.
For millions of students across the country, making good grades in their final exams and attaining their senior secondary school certificate is crucial. It will allow them to move to higher education and improve their chances of securing a good job with the government or with private firms.
Critics say hitting high marks could be difficult this year and that the government took too long to come out with health guidelines for schools to reopen. Nigeria has been seeing an improvement in results in recent years. In 2019, at least 64% of final year secondary school students passed their exams, which was about 5% better than the previous year. And in order for the country to keep up with this trend, experts say it will require intense preparations by teachers and students in the coming days. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
In Ethiopia, one organization has come up with a business model to get protective gear to health workers and help women struggling with poverty to support themselves. Tibeb Leatherworks is shifting its production from leather products to face shields and is employing women in a project to make the protective gear. Koleto Njohi visited the workshop in Addis Ababa and filed the following report.
For years, Elizabeth Getachew struggled to find work because she lacked skills. At Tibeb Leatherworks, she was trained for free in leather production and was expecting to leave sometime in March. However, the COVID-19 pandemic brought new demand for protective gear and the company kept her on.
Before I joined Tibeb Leatherworks, I was lacking not only financially, but in many aspects, like time management. Now I manage my time well. We're now making face shields, and I'm happy that I'm contributing something to my country.
According to the UN Children Education Fund, poverty among women in Ethiopia is growing and is linked to lack of economic, social and political empowerment. Tibeb Leatherworks trained more than 20 impoverished women in leather production skills over the years, who then seek employment in other places. The shift in production from leather to face shields has led to the employment of 8 women who work in shifts.
It was not hard. So we had gone through 2 steps. One is the design stage and the production stage. So initially we designed some products, and after going through back and forth with the doctors, we shifted directly to manufacturing, and we gave them around 6 hours of trainings to all of our staff, and it kept on going.
The women produce an average of 1,000 face shields daily. Doctors and hospitals around the country only pay for the exact cost of production, but the initiative derives profits from orders from non-governmental organizations. This keeps Elizabeth and her colleagues in profit.
PPE production sort of saved our production line and assembly line because they've been working with leather, and then that drastically dropped within the past year. So when PPE production was started and we gave them that training and they got inputted into this specific work, they were able to still make that earning and still be independent economically and not depend on others. So as we grow this PPE production, that's what we are trying to employ. Like the women we train will be brought onto the PPE production line, and then we'll grow that as well.
Initiatives like these are expected to see expansion as the pandemic continues. The Ethiopian government is encouraging local initiatives to produce protective gear and other requirements in battling the COVID-19 pandemic. It hopes this will reduce the inconvenience and cost of imports, since, as the Minister of Health suggests, the country is yet to reach its peak of the pandemic. For Elizabeth and other women being trained by social enterprises, the benefit from economic empowerment will last them well beyond the pandemic. Coletta Njohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
The coronavirus pandemic has affected many industries in Africa, from transportation and education to the food and beverage industry. In an attempt to stay afloat, many businesses have been adapting to new ways of working, but this has caused unprecedented disruptions to economies and labor markets. Today, we analyze how the pandemic has affected transport in our special series focusing on how the continent is coping with the impact of COVID-19. Well, on to our continuing series on Africa fighting COVID-19. We shift our focus to ambulance operators. These are the unsung heroes in everyday emergency response efforts. In our next story, our reporter Nick Mudimba shows us what a workday is like in the life of an ambulance operator in Kenya.
It's 6 a.m. in the morning and Joshua Ndungu is getting ready to face the day. After his wife serves him breakfast, it's time for the ambulance operator to bid his family goodbye and head to work. As the streets of Nairobi slowly come to life before the morning mist settles. After arriving at his workplace, his first stop is the dispatch center. Here, Joshua gets briefed about his area of coverage for the day, after which he heads straight to the ambulance, but not before some hearty chat with colleagues. Then it's all systems go.
Initially, when I joined EMS, when I joined E+, it was a challenge to a point whereby before your spouse gets to understand how you work and how the setup of your work is, it was a challenge. To a point, it would bring a conflict because sometimes you're not even assured if you'll go back home.
COVID-19 poses a real threat to frontline workers globally. Ambulance operators who play the crucial role of rushing health personnel to the scene and evacuating suspected cases to isolation centers take each day as it comes.
COVID, whatever you try to minimize is much contact with the patients. But then you'll have to do your full PPEs for you to be safe. Have your full PPEs. Also, we do a lot of trainings on donning and doffing so that you don't contaminate yourself whenever you're donning and whenever you're doffing. Because that is the level where most of the contamination will come in.
His explanation is suddenly interrupted. An emergency call comes in.
I'm informed that there's a trailer that has fallen down in the process of falling on a lady.
The response is swift. With sirens blaring, the ambulance team sets off. Speed is of the essence, and so is safe driving. Finally, the team arrives at the scene of an accident. The driver of a trailer lost control and rammed into some pedestrians.
We are currently at an accident scene, and for the first responders, ambulance drivers, the medics, paramedics, this is just part of their daily lives. Sometimes it's traumatic to them, but they do it for the sake of humanity. They do it to serve humanity. And today, unfortunately, a life has been lost here, and the survivors are being attended to.
Joshua's body language speaks volumes. He is crestfallen at the loss of life. He has to deal with such disappointments occasionally in his line of work.
E+ has an arranged counseling with experts, whereby you organize for counseling sessions for you to be able to overcome whatever you have seen and whatever you've gone through.
The ambulance crews put their lives in danger to save others. This is what it means to be a hero in society. This is what it means to leave behind a strong professional legacy. Their courage, selflessness, and dedication are humbling, to say the least. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, motorbike taxis, popularly known as boda bodas, are the easiest way to get around in Uganda. With the resumption of public transport services in that country, motorbike taxi riders must now follow strict measures imposed by the government to curb the spread of the virus. Leon Sayanga reports.
The capital Kampala is abuzz with activity. A few weeks ago, the government eased its COVID-19 lockdown restrictions. One sector that benefited as well was the transport sector. Public cars are now allowed to ferry passengers at only half the capacity. Motorbike taxis as well, that previously were only allowed to ferry luggage, can as well transport passengers. They, however, now have standard operating procedures. Some of those include the riders must have temperature guns, they must have face masks, sanitizers, and most importantly, a registration book to take the details of each passenger they are to take to whichever destination. Now, some of the motorbike taxi riders have been able to adhere to these standard operating procedures. Several others are not really mindful of the SOPs. I'll talk to Abe here. He's one of the riders at the stage here in the capital to tell me about what he thinks of the standard operating procedures. Abe, the government put out a few standard operating procedures, and what are your thoughts about them? Well, Abba tells me it's going to be difficult for many of the motorbike taxi riders to adhere to the standard operating procedures. They say the temperature guns are expensive, they can't afford them, and some of the clients they hope to take don't want to divulge as much information for them because it is by law now that they must register each and every passenger they are supposed to take. The government says that these are the kind of standards that must be adhered to by the motorbike taxi riders. How much further it will go, we can only wait and see. Leon Sanyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Well, I will be standing by to bring you more news, including the latest in the world of sport. But for now, here's the latest in business with Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in business. The DRC reopens its airspace after a closure of nearly 5 months. And headline inflation has risen for the 11th consecutive month to just under 13% in Nigeria.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Let's start in Africa's largest copper producer. The Democratic Republic of Congo has reopened its airspace after nearly 5 months. as the government over there continues its efforts to revive the economy. After reporting the country's first COVID-19 cases on the 10th of March, the DRC's government imposed a range of restrictions designed to contain the spread of the virus. Now, the suspension of non-essential international flights was right among the country's measures, which are aimed at preventing the importation, if you will, of the virus from outside the country's borders. Arriving passengers have to go through health protocols, including temperature checks and hand washing, before they're allowed into the country. The incoming Southern African Development Community Chair, President Philippe Nyusi, says that there's an urgent need to set strategies to reduce poverty, increase production and enhance competitiveness across the regional bloc. Nyusi says the region can develop even further if it avoids a replication of infrastructure projects and what he described as unnecessary competition. The 40th Heads of States and Government Summit for SADC was held virtually for the first time in its history, of course due to the COVID-19 pandemic. President Nyusi stressed the importance of peace and stability in promoting development, and he called for greater cohesion, cooperation and unity among member states. On to West Africa now. Nigeria needs to make some pretty tough policy decisions to keep its oil-dependent economy afloat. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, oil revenues were nowhere near what the country needed in order to properly fund its budget. The pandemic has compounded that problem as oil prices fell and non-oil business activity fell as well, which of course does generate other tax revenues. All of that has diminished. Foreign currency scarcity is an increasingly larger problem for Africa's biggest oil producer. Inflation has also risen for the 11th month in a row to just under 13%. CGTN's Deji Badmus takes up the story.
This rice mill has only just come alive after being literally grounded for several months because of the COVID-19-induced lockdown imposed by the government in the wake of the outbreak of the virus in Nigeria. The meal accounts for part of the 7 million metric tons of rice consumed by Nigerians annually. But John Matthew, who runs the meal along with the rice farm, says the disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic created scarcity and pushed up the price of rice.
When there was interstate lockdown, there was no movement. Even when you get the product and they say these are foodstuffs, they should be allowed to pass, you find, there are a lot of difficulties on the road. Police will come with his own story, they packed you all, you sleep in the checkpoint.
Virtually every farmer in the country had the same experience, and even though the restrictions have now been eased, recovery is proving very slow, and it is part of what is reflected in the new inflation figure, especially that of food inflation, which is now at 15.48%, and that is giving a lot of people a cause for worry.
Food is important to everyone, particularly at this difficult time, and also based on the fact that Nigeria is the #1 country in the world for the highest percentage of household income that is spent on food. So, which means we have to make sure that as much as possible, the inflation on food does not push more people into extreme poverty. So the way to also do that is to try and have a lot of local substitute for a lot of the things that we currently import.
2 rounds of devaluation, the removal of oil subsidy, and to some extent the increment of VAT from 5% to 7.5% have also combined to drive up the prices of goods and services. But experts say the government's options are very limited.
So in Q1 of 2020, government spent 99.2%, federal government of its revenue to service debt. So in times of crisis like this, you have lower revenues, but you actually have higher expenses than before, which means your budget deficit would just, be out of this world. So in a way, there's some, empathy and sympathy for government in trying to raise revenue. But the important thing, and you should not raise revenue in a way that is going to be counterproductive, particularly to growth, employment generation, and recovery.
At 12.82%, Nigeria's inflation is at the highest in 27 months. Analysts say the figure will likely continue to rise, given the government's drive for revenue to keep the country running and service debts. There are even talks of another round of devaluation. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has more than doubled Tunisia's budget deficit for 2020. It's raised it to a new forecast of 7% compared to pre-pandemic estimates of just 3%. Now, while the government in the North African state has ended all restrictions on movement and businesses, and it's opened up sea, land and air borders to international traffic back in June, the impact of this pandemic is not to be underestimated. Economic output is forecast to shrink by 6.5%. Here's CGTN's Adin Chouachi with the details.
The budget deficit in Tunisia soared to 3.8 billion dinars, equivalent to $1.4 billion in the first half of 2020, against 2.4 billion dinars, about $903 million in 2019, as shown by results of the state budget execution. This is due to the North African state's own resources dropping 11.9% compared to 18.3% rise in the first 6 months of 2019.
The first 6 months of 2020 were extremely difficult compared to the same period in 2019. Tax revenues plunged by around 12%. The drop is seen in revenues from direct taxes and indirect taxes. Direct corporate tax revenues fell 18.7% after posting a 40.3% rise last year. Indirect taxes saw considerable decrease, mainly with VAT receipts reducing by 15.5% and other indirect taxes dropping by 13%.
The governor of the Central Bank of Tunisia explained that the outstanding public debt has increased to $32 billion at the end of June 2020, up 8.3% compared to its level at the end of December 2019. The bank forecasts growth this year to shrink to 6.5%.
The most affected sectors are the tourism, transport, airline and maritime business, as well as other domains which are tied up to tourism. The agriculture, food and service sectors, especially exporting companies, are also suffering because the European Union is their first partner and the EU itself is facing an economic crisis due to the pandemic.
Tunisia's industrial minister noted that 360 small and medium-sized enterprises operating in the automotive and aeronautics sectors and which had been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic will benefit from a new support program.
Before the pandemic, some companies had confirmed orders until 2025, but the crisis hit the vital industrial and economic sectors. Several export-oriented industries lost 100% of their activity in less than 2 months. The recovery will be hard without state intervention.
The Minister of Finance announced that the bill relating to the support of economic revival, the integration of the informal sector and the fight against tax evasion was adopted by a ministerial council and submitted to the House of the People's Representatives. The objective of this bill is to support economic enterprises and help them gradually resume the pace of their activities. A recent study published by the National Institute of Statistics has revealed that up to 35% of the private sector companies, especially SMEs, could close down permanently due to the negative impact of the coronavirus crisis. Authorities say that over 100,000 people could lose their jobs if a second wave of COVID-19 hits the country in September. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Now, the Trump administration has announced that it will further tighten restrictions on the Chinese tech firm Huawei. The United States essentially aims to crack down on its access to computer chips developed or produced with American software or technology. Here's CGTN's Jim Spellman with the details.
The Trump administration has largely banned Huawei from doing business in the United States, but a reprieve has been in place that allowed U.S. software firms to send updates to Huawei, who could in turn update its hardware around the world. That reprieve ended last week. The biggest consumer impact will be on owners of Huawei mobile phones that run Google's Android operating system. Google will no longer be allowed to update the OS on Huawei devices. The move will also impact rural U.S. internet providers that rely on Huawei technology. The Trump administration is also placing restrictions on 38 entities in 21 countries, claiming Huawei has used these third-party affiliates to get around U.S. sanctions to buy components that include U.S. technology. These are the latest moves from the Trump administration to hobble Huawei and other Chinese tech firms over allegations that these companies present a security risk and could share user data with the Chinese government.
Well, the big thing is Huawei, right? Huawei's not here, and Huawei I'm not allowing. And I've told European countries and others, Australia has been fantastic as an example, but Huawei's not coming here.
Beijing rejects Trump's claims that Huawei presents a security risk.
From intervening in the 5G construction of other countries to publicly intimidating allies to obey the US's will to reject Huawei, individual US politicians have used national power and spared no efforts to prevent Chinese companies from gaining a leading advantage in the 5G field. What they want is probably not a clean network, but a US network.
Huawei has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing, and the U.S. government has failed to publicly produce evidence to back up claims that Chinese tech firms present a security risk. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Bethesda, Maryland.
A bit more news on Huawei. Government lawyers say Canadian authorities have released as much information as they legally can about the arrest of Huawei's chief financial officer, Meng Wanzhou. Now, this was in response to a request from her defense lawyers for 37 documents in a case in which she's challenging an application for her extradition to the United States. The CFO's defense team has zeroed in on communications surrounding her arrest back in 2018. They're trying to convince the British Columbia Supreme Court to release documents which they believe can prove that Meng was a victim of misconduct. The defense team is arguing that Canadian and American authorities violated due process while questioning the Huawei CFO before her arrest. The breaches allegedly included the improper sharing of identifying details about her electronic devices. Canada so far has denied these allegations. Speaking of Canada, a new trade row is underway between Canada and her neighbour to the south after tariffs imposed by Washington took effect on the 16th of August. Now, the Trump administration is accusing Canada of trying to flood the United States with cheap imports. As CGTN's Owen Fairclough now reports, Canada is retaliating.
Trade battles defined Donald Trump's presidency before COVID-19, and as he seeks a second term, he's back on familiar ground.
I signed a proclamation that defends American industry by reimposing aluminum tariffs on Canada. Canada was taking advantage of us, as usual.
Trump announced those 10% duties while visiting a washing machine factory in Ohio earlier this month. Tariffs on cheaper imports have been credited with saving and even creating jobs here.
For those who thought tariffs were a very pre-COVID-19 affair, Trump is imposing them upon Canada just months before the presidential election. And a reminder to voters that he wants to be seen as the president who can protect blue-collar workers in crucial swing states against what he considers unfair foreign competition.
The US claims Canadian aluminium imports have surged beyond the terms of a new three-way trade deal with Mexico that Trump signed just as the pandemic erupted. Canada is retaliating with equivalent tariffs taking effect next month.
At a time when we are fighting a global pandemic, working on both sides of the Canada-US border to prevent loss of life and preserve jobs, a trade dispute is the last thing anyone needs.
And if these Ohio workers are safe for now, manufacturers and trade experts agree that consumers will bear the brunt of those tariffs by paying higher prices. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
And the latest on trade rows brings this segment to a close. I'll be back at the top of the hour, though. In global business, we'll be looking at reports that the World Bank has delayed, apparently, a $1.5 billion credit line that Nigeria has applied for due to concerns that Nigeria may not actually deliver on the reforms it needs to pull off. We'll have the details on those and plenty more live from Abuja. See you at 1800 GMT. For now, back to Hannah.
Thank you, Rama. Well, let's now take a short break and return. It's sports headlines. Here's what's coming up. Uganda's Rugby 7 squad left to pick up the pieces following cancellation of the World Series.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? sports scene. Find your game.
Well, let's now take a look at what's happening in the world of sport. Uganda's national sevens side is regretting all missed opportunities of playing international rugby this year following the cancellation of continental and global matches due to the outbreak. Reporting from Uganda's